Mark chapter 11, beginning at verse 7. Then they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their cloaks on it, and he sat on it. Many people spread their cloaks on the road, and others spread leafy branches that they had cut in the fields. Then those who went ahead and those who followed were shouting, "Hosanna! Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our ancestor David. Hosanna in the highest heaven." Then he entered Jerusalem and went into the temple. And when he had looked around at everything, as it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. The eastern gate to the old city in Jerusalem is sometimes known as the Golden or the Beautiful Gate. It was rebuilt into the wall near the Temple Mount at the end of the 7th century by the Byzantines and the Muslims. It was then sealed to prevent Jewish zealots from creating and promoting a Messiah-like political figure to rally around. The idea being that God's anointed would enter the city through that particular gate. Keep the gate locked, no Messiah. Easy. The Crusaders kept the gate locked, even though they'd unblock it and open it up for Palm Sunday. Since then, it's remained closed, and ever thus, for hundreds and hundreds of years. But then in 1969, James Fleming, then a grad student at Jerusalem University College, was poking around the eastern wall of the temple where a Muslim cemetery had long been located. It had rained heavily the night before, and the ground was still soggy. As he investigated the area immediately before the eastern gate, the ground beneath his feet gave way, and he slid into a hole about 8 feet deep. Unhurt, Fleming found himself knee-deep in bones, and suddenly became aware he'd fallen into a mass burial site. While that's creepy enough, that's not the cool part. The space wasn't just where they dumped bones over the years, it was something else. When he looked around, he said, "I noted with astonishment that on the eastern face of the turret wall," the gate pokes out about 6 feet from the rest of the wall, directly beneath the eastern gate itself were 5 wedge-shaped stones, neatly set in top of a massive arch spanning the wall. Here were the remains of an earlier gate to Jerusalem, below the present and visible gate, one that apparently had never been fully documented. Very soon after this discovery, the Muslim authorities who owned the cemetery covered the chamber, cemented over the top, and surrounded the mass grave with a protective iron fence. Sadly, it means that it's unlikely that Israeli or any other archaeologists will be able to excavate the original eastern gate in the near future. Perhaps it will take the Messiah to do that. The historian Josephus states that the eastern temple enclosure wall was the only one not rebuilt by Herod the Great. That ancient gate may therefore date from the time of Solomon, maybe 1000 BC, or at least from Nehemiah, about 450 BC. This means that this gate is very probably the same gate Jesus entered on Palm Sunday. So what? Did Mr. Fleming uncover a buried shrine? No. Why is this a big deal? 10 years ago last month, on a Sunday afternoon, Louise and I had a pleasant lunch with relatives and friends down on Highland Avenue, after which Louise and I dashed home, quickly changed clothes, and headed for the turnpike. Road trip. Wasn't the easiest drive I ever had. We drove straight through, and about 5.5 stormy hours later, arrived at our hotel outside Princeton, New Jersey. We checked in. Luckily, we found our favorite restaurant and our favorite ice cream place open on Sunday night. Very refreshing. Awakening early President's Day morning, it seemed awfully still. Even though the hotel was right on Route 1, there was almost no sound. Why? I looked out the window. We had 5 inches of snow, that's why. It was a wet, heavy snow, however, so the roads were still passable. We drove to the New Jersey Transit Station in Princeton Junction, parked the car, boarded a train to Penn Station, New York City. Even on a holiday morning, Penn Station was hopping. We got a bagel with Zabars, boarded the #1 train subway uptown, got off at Columbus Circle, and made our way upstairs into the misty morning. As soon as we got to the top of the stairs to the street, we saw what we'd come to see. There, arching away from us into the distance, amid the grays and browns and blacks of the trees and rocks of Central Park, were patches and lines of bright color. We picked our way across the street and found the corner entrance to that great, glorious expanse of nature, which is truly the sacred center of that city. Not 20 feet inside the park was the first of 7,500 bright orange saffron gates, stretching intermittently along the paths of the park for a total of 23 miles. 16 feet high, 5.5 to 18 feet wide, with a panel of matching cloth hanging down within 7 feet of the pathways. The gates was a seemingly endless series of portals. Most of them were at regular intervals about 12 feet apart, allowing for low-hanging tree branches sometimes. It was the work of the concept artist Christo and his wife Jean-Claude. He's the guy who wraps up buildings, drapes trees, puts umbrellas on hillsides, and does it all on an enormous scale. This was the first thing I'd seen in person. These statistics were impressive. Just resting on heavy steel bases, 600 people assembled with thousands of gates in less than 10 days. Over 1 million square feet of orange ripstop nylon hung from reinforced vinyl supports. The gates were on display 16 days, from February 12th through February 27th. They were then taken down and all the materials recycled. Nothing for sale. Nothing left behind except memories. The cost of the entire project was borne by the artists who raised money by selling related original artwork. Profits on merchandise went directly to the park. Tallies later said that people visited the park at between 4 and 5 times the normal rate, resulting in $254 million of what's called economic activity. These are the details, but frankly, none of it made much difference to us. What made a difference was the experience. And that, I was happy to learn, was the point. The gates, Christo said, it's very difficult. You ask us to talk. This project is not involving talk. It's a real physical space. It's not necessary to talk. You spend time. You experience the project. And that's why I'm talking about a work of public art as a kind of holy place. Christo didn't use those terms, but his evocation of a gate reaches deep into human experience. And maybe I just have this kind of sensitivity, but what immediately jumped out at me, were the words of Psalm 100, "Enter God's gates with thanksgiving, and God's courts with praise." This and a whole host of biblical images. And why not? The gate or gates are mentioned 437 times in the Bible. It appears in Genesis, as Jacob wrestled with the angel in the morning, he said, "How awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven." Most of the Bible, the gate is both a central part of the stronghold of the city and a civic gathering place. The laws given by Moses were supposed to be written on the sides of the gates. The elders would meet at the gate to discuss matters of common interest and dispense collective judgment. The defense of the city was divided among residents by assigning gates to each of them, on the condition that the gates were not just a matter of defense, but a matter of pride. Technically, they were so important that Ezekiel gives explicit instructions about how to make them and how to maintain them. Gates are used metaphorically as the opening to the morning and evening to life and death. Psalm 118 prays, "Open to me the gates of righteousness, that I may enter through them and give thanks to the Lord. This is the gate of the Lord, the righteous shall enter through it." Isaiah looks for God's redemption when he says, "Violence shall no more be heard in your land, devastation or destruction within your borders. You shall call your walls salvation and your gates praise." In the New Testament, Jesus uses the image of a gate as a point of decision. Referring to a gate through a pasture wall, he says, "Very truly I tell you, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by another way is a thief and a bandit. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep." The disciples did not understand what he was saying to them. So again, Jesus said to them, "Very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and bandits, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved and will come in and go out and find pasture." Entering the city by the gates was a sign of acceptance, which is why the heavenly Jerusalem, the gates there will never be shut by day, and there will be no night there. "Blessed are those who wash their robes," we read, "so they will have the right to the tree of life and may enter the city by the gates." Finally, the great community of faith that is the church will be so blessed, Jesus says, that the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Gates are physical structures that are often symbolic of, they point to, ineffable social and spiritual realities. Physical gates keep in or they keep out. They keep things open and close the way to some new realities, new ways of seeing the world, of experiencing the grace of God. If the doors are shut, if the doors are open, the light, the peace, the joy of God comes in. Gates can be celebrative, ceremonial. They can be joyous. The gates that we saw were more of an invitation to celebrate life even in the midst of winter. Like a beautiful gate in a garden wall, they opened into a different world, another whole world. Here's what one observer wrote. Friends were walking in the park when suddenly they got a load of their 1,000 fellow walkers and registered the common mood, a sort of vast, blankety, almost drowsy contentment. He couldn't think of any other occasion on which he had witnessed so many New Yorkers moving slowly when they didn't have to. Each person looked strangely, nakedly personal, he said, not a New Yorker at all, or anything else in particular. The crowd's many-voiced sound had an indoor intimacy like a bright murmur in a theater during the intermission, when the play is good and everyone knows that everyone knows that the play is good. The overall effect, which was somewhat like that of an electrical blackout or a major blizzard, minus the inconvenience, was weird and terrific. It felt vaguely religious. Vaguely religious. The zealous installers and minders, identifiable by their uniforms and their chatty pride were like acolytes. And as with any ritual, though the gates can't be ritual because performed just once, how people behave during the installation is what it is for and what it is about. He was just right. As Louise and I walked even slower because of the snow, we noticed people as much as the gates, maybe even more. Friendly, outgoing people. This lady with Seattle who had, of course, a cup of Starbucks in her hand. This bearded guardian from Vero Beach, Florida. This sniffling art student from Brooklyn. People actually talking to each other. If you haven't spent time in New York, you don't know what a huge deal that is. People in Pittsburgh will talk to you on the street, especially if the Steelers are doing well. This does not happen that much in New York, trust me. But here they were, strangers all, giving and asking for directions, exchanging personal information about where they came from and what they thought of the whole thing, and could they get a swatch of that fabric. Children threw snowballs, rode on sleds and laughed. People held hands and said nothing. It was as if the whole park was one large, rambling, fluttering, misty, gorgeous suburb of heaven itself. A place where it mattered less where you were from than where you are now. As one Irish-born carriage driver said, it was like Christmas out there. 2 weeks of Christmas. Actually, the cabbie had a pretty good grip on the meaning of the installation, far more than most of the refined art critics. It was Christmas out there. That's the experience of a gate. But not just to a physical city with stones and mortar. That's an entry to a whole new reality that comes when we find ourselves, after so long a wait, walking through the gates of faith. The artist put up 7,500 gates, curtains billowing in the wind, giving to millions of people countless occasions for joy, just waiting for them along whatever path they chose. Just so, every day, every single day can and should be a day for giving thanks. Giving thanks for entering anew the gate of morning into a day of rich, full, and abundant life. A life filled with the possibility of joy and wonder. A life when you offer, would you like me to take your picture? Would you take ours? My prayer for each and all of us entering into this Holy Week is to approach our own spiritual gates with humility, but also with confidence, feeling that regardless of the weather, there's a bright murmur in the air when life is good and everyone knows that everyone knows it. May the bright murmur of the gates of faith find its way into our own hearts, each and all of us. Amen.